Human beings have been networking since the Stone Age. When we were in caves, when we were navigating the savannah and tribes on the lookout from lions and tigers and whatever else was out there at the time, we were networking, right? But we weren't necessarily networking for business. We were in a way, right? Because we were trading goods, we were even trading people at that time. I mean, networking was used for business, but networking was simply something that you did in order to experience more joy in your life. It was something you did in order to build and develop and nurture relationships in their lives. And today we're actually speaking to someone who met their wife from the world of networking. His name is Mr. James West. He's a co-founder along with his wife Kelly of Only Networking. We're going to talk about what that looks like. But today we're really not just going to dive into the strategies of networking. We're going to dive into the mental health aspects of networking. We're going to talk about how networking will improve not just only your business, but your entire life as a result. So you know the fee for the Be Better broadcast. When you take away any piece of advice or wisdom or philosophy, or even if we just made you smile or laugh, share this show with just one other person who could also use these philosophies. You're the reason that our show has grown the way that it has over the past year and a half, from one viewer to now thousands of viewers, because you are the greatest part of the Be Better team. So without further ado, let's talk about all the different fun nuances of networking with James West. And for those who don't know James co-founded Only Networking in 2018 with his wife in the United Kingdom. They met while networking and were even networking on their wedding day in New York. James believes that networking is far more valuable than simply finding business opportunities. Formerly an editor, journalist, and web designer, James has found that networking has helped him every step of the way, including learning from his failures. James, pleasure to have you here, sir. Thanks so much for being on the show.
You are amazing. That's the best intro I've ever had. That's better than one I would have written for myself.
Well, I appreciate that. I'm happy to talk to you because we met a few months ago, and I really enjoyed our conversation because it's very clear that you love meeting new people and you love to talk to new people. And it's very clear in just the way that you interact. And even when I saw you today, I was like, it's like we haven't even been apart for a few months. And you flexed your networking muscle when you're like, Brandon, we got to talk aside from the show too, because it's been a while since we've caught up. And I'm like, this guy is a master networker. I mean, Christine introduced us. And Christine is, in my mind, one of the other master networkers of the world. She is the Obi-Wan Kenobi of networking. And she introduced me to the world of intentional networking, which changed my business. I mean, my business wasn't really even a business until I discovered networking, and then it became a business. So I'm curious for you, I know you started Only in 2018, but how did you find yourself in this world of networking? How did you get into it?
It's a good few years ago now, but yeah, it's interesting because you've touched upon straight away one of the things that tends to happen with networking is that the reason we start changes over time, or it isn't the thing that we actually go back for. So like a lot of people, I went to a networking event, a BNI in the UK, because someone recommended it and I needed more business. I was a writer, so I went from being a journalist to being an outsourced writer or a freelance writer. Went to networking, needed business. And this is the bit that I'm quite embarrassed about, Brandon, that I went to a networking event, didn't get any business after one meeting. And I thought, well, I'm not going to go back to that again. What was the point of that? So, yeah. And I think that's typical. We go to networking because we want business inquiries, don't we? That's the typical approach. But over years, that really morphed into, once I understood that, okay, there are business opportunities. There are huge amounts of business opportunities, including working out how to position what I did, because no one cared about me being a writer or an editor. I thought they would. But of course, I didn't fix a problem, did I? What was I actually going to do for those people? And do you know what the thing was that actually became my business in those early days is that I started having conversations with people, found out about their pain points. Everyone wanted me to teach them how to do Twitter, because that was the hot thing at the time. So I started talking about, I can help you do Twitter. And suddenly I was in demand. So yeah, that's an overlooked part of networking. You learn supply and demand by asking questions.
So when you first started, you go there because you want more business opportunity. I actually went to a BNI meeting for the first time about 3 weeks ago. Recently, I was invited by a friend and I went, and it was a really cool environment. Very different than something like Ripple Effects. Very different than something I'm sure like Only. But it was cool all in itself. But it very much is business focused. Like the first question most people are asking there is, "Tell me about you. Tell me about your business. What do you do?" And that's okay. Like, and that's fine. I feel kind of weird though, just jumping right into what I do. Like, oh, I work with sales teams in order to improve revenue or boost sales. And it's like, that's not who we are as human beings. Something that Christine did at the beginning was she wanted to learn more about the individual. So she would ask us about us and we'd share 10 facts about us with other people. And a few of those facts, because she curated each of what one of them was, like she curated the question, a few of those was specifically about what we did work wise, what we did for our business. So when you went to that BNI meeting and you're like, okay, I didn't get an immediate business result from this. Did you go back to BNI? Did you do something different? Like, what was the next step? Like, what made you say, I'm going to continue doing this, even though it didn't get me the immediate result that I wanted?
Because I still needed work, even though I didn't really think it gave me a result. And then the guy that invited me said, look, you need to come back. It's a long game. You need to work out what the proposition is. Because this is the thing. How do you get a result from networking? One, you need to build relationships. Because going back to your point about, yeah, ultimately, most people network because they're looking for business opportunities. But let me ask you this, and this is for the audience as well. Most people that go to networking are selling B2B services. We don't get a lot of B to consumer typically at networking. Mm-hmm. It's B2B. How many of you have ever bought a B2B service without having a relationship with that person first?
Yeah.
No one.
Practically non-existent.
So if that's true, and we all know that to be true, why do we lead with the promise of a referral or a piece of business, not the relationship? And that is basically what we did with Only. We said, lead with the reality, which is lead with the relationship. Don't lead with the promise of the referral. And that's basically how we flipped it on its head. But going back to the point about getting a result from networking, two things. A, you've got to build credit with a network, because if you walk into a network and say, hi, this is me. I'm James. I'm great. Do you want to buy from me? No, of course I don't, because I don't know you. I haven't got relationships. I haven't built any credit with that network. So first and foremost, you need to build credit. It doesn't mean buying from people, but you've certainly got to show that you're interested in them. Rather than just leaping straight to the, would you like to buy from me? So earn some credit. And then the other thing that's really important, what's the box on the shelf behind you that I can buy if I want to?
Yes.
Because particularly in the coaching space, a lot of people say, well, it's quite a broad pitch, isn't it? Well, I coach and I'm a lifestyle coach or I'm a business coach. Okay. Does it cost $100,000 or does it cost $10? Because yes. I've got no idea, and that's going to affect my ability to want to have that deeper conversation with you. So build credit, tell me what the box on the shelf is. And once you've told me what the box is, you don't have to talk about it anymore. Don't kind of ram it down my throat. So that's what I learned from those early days, but it took me a long time.
Now, okay, so I'm just, again, curious of the transition between you having the intention of wanting to get more business and then discovering that networking is all about the relationships. Like, was it a person that sparked that revelation? Was it just going to enough of these events, meeting enough people? Was it discovering the result as an accident of, oh, wow, like now I know these individuals, I know what they want, and now they're asking me to help them with this thing. Like, did you discover this idea of building this relationship capital on accident? Or is it something that someone said, hey, James, let me talk to you about how networking is done the right way?
I don't remember specifically, but I kind of do know the answer. It would have just happened over time. I tell you what I had in my favor. I'm really nosy. And I really like getting to know people. And I don't think you can fake that. I just think people are fascinating.
Yeah.
Because whatever the 2-second opinion that you form of people is typically not always wrong. It's sometimes quite a good marker. But I love building the depth and going through those layers to really understand people. And I find that fascinating. So I think by me being that way and being a journalist, asking questions, what I discovered, the best way to get attention is not to talk about yourself, it's to give people attention.
Yeah.
So when I started asking people questions, well, what's your business like? How have you got to where you've got to? People love that stuff. And of course, in the process of them thinking, oh, look, he's asking me lots of questions, he's really interested, they start drip feeding me with all the information that I needed in order to build a product that was suitable for that market. Whereas what people typically do at networking, they walk into the room and they say, that box, by the way, that I talked about on the shelf, you do have it in mind.
Yeah.
You maybe don't communicate it, but actually the best way to test whether anyone wants that box on the shelf is asking those questions. Because think about marketing, and this is one of the overlooked bits about networking. When we market, we just post stuff, don't we? We put it out into the world, and yeah, we've got analytics that can kind of ascertain whether it's working or not, but we don't get immediacy of feedback. So if I post something on LinkedIn, I might get a few likes, I might get a few comments, but I don't really know how people feel about it unless they click the button to buy, which shows up in my analytics. Networking, you get immediate feedback. You can tell when people are bored. You can tell when people are engaged. Kelly always says, when you notice people start writing things down, that means you've said something that's resonated. Immediacy of feedback that we don't get on social media, you get at networking. So I just based it on that and built the product from there, I think.
That's true. Absolutely. Have you always been a curious person? Because that idea of people are fascinating, that is very much a very empowering and beneficial belief to have. And I feel like I have always been that way to an extent, but I also developed that as almost like a self-defense mechanism when I was younger, because I was never the best at starting conversations, or even when I was younger, carrying them along. I was always a very shy person. And I found that I had the most quote unquote success in conversations when I asked the other person about them and when I wanted to learn more about other people. And I just discovered people like when you ask about them, people like when you're giving them attention. And that's something that turned into what I'm doing today, my success in sales, because sales is very much learn about the other person, discover their pain points, develop your product or position your product and frame it around that. Have you always been a curious person your whole life? Is that what brought you to journalism?
Yeah, I think so, because I love reading. I love learning about people. I'd probably say one of my hobbies is people watching, just sitting and observing people. It's fascinating, isn't it? So, and I do think that that's quite important as well, because look, networking, if you are doing it for a transactional outcome, I think you have to have an element of that, even if you have to kind of fake it to make it. That you have to show that you're interested in people. You're not going to buy from most people you meet at networking, but you've got to try at least to show willing. You know, if you connect with people on networking events, go and like their page and then like some of their posts or put a comment on it, because give attention. Typically, it's very hard to ignore someone that's shown you attention, isn't it? This is what you found, Brandon, over the years. And I think the other thing that I've learned is that don't be afraid of asking an awkward question or digging a little bit deeper, because in all my years of doing that, as long as you're not being offensive or rude, I've never asked anyone a question about, well, tell me about your family. That's a great one. If you want to cut to the chase as to what someone's really like, what do you do when you're not working? What did you do this weekend? That's how you actually get into depth of relationships.
Yeah.
Whereas if you just keep talking about, well, why do you do what you do in business? Tell me about that. How do you position it?
Yeah.
The conversation will eventually kind of hit a dead end. So be bold and just ask people questions. I've rarely ever been refused an answer when I've done that.
Yeah, no, that's absolutely a great point. Again, it reminds me of the early sales training I received. I had a mentor, his name was Tim back in the day, and he said, Brandon, the first objective when you sit down with a customer at your desk is, I sold cell phones. He's like, do not talk about cell phones for the first 10 minutes. I was like, what do you mean? I said, we're in a cell phone store. And he's like, that's the difference, though. He said, Jim over there is going to talk about cell phones as soon as that person walks in, and Jim isn't going to learn a damn thing about that person, at least anything that's worth knowing about them. But if you ask about them, if you ask about how their day is going, what they have planned, ask about their weekend, ask about their family, if you truly get to know them, for the goal is 10 minutes, but even if it's 3 minutes, then you're going to have a much higher chance of not just selling something, but actually developing a relationship with that person across the desk from you. And I took that advice, and I didn't always stick to it. Our immediate thing is I'm in this specific environment, which means I must do this thing. Like when we're in a networking environment, we immediately think I have to get the most out of this. I have to go talk to people. I'm naturally a shy person, so I have to make sure I meet every single person and talk to them about their business. But even if you only meet 3 people and you get to go deep with those people, you talk with them for maybe 10 minutes, the event's maybe an hour, and you learn something that's not just surface level about them, then those are the relationships that you keep and that you bring with you, and that you actually feel that it's a relationship and not just, like you said, a transaction.
If they want a transaction, the person that you're speaking to will soon lead you to it. They'll just say, look, I just want to talk about that thing. So let them do that for you. But you, like you say, just talk in general about them. Look, no one remembers what you say. And particularly at networking, your introduction, people really stress about it. I've got to nail the intro because that's the bit that's going to sell. It's not. I could go into a networking room and just go, hi, I'm James. I want to get to know you and learn about your businesses. No one actually cares what I'll do. They'll remember me because I took interest in them and I asked those questions. I've said this before. I think at networking in particular, your behavior when you're not talking is probably more important than when you are talking. So we've had some amazing examples of this, of people that when it's their chance to speak, they're really animated and they come alive, and it might be semi-scripted. They might have practiced it and they're thinking, I've nailed it. I've really said what I wanted to say in a really engaging way. And you know what they do for the rest of the meeting? They sit here over here paying no attention to what anyone else is saying. I'm not good, and I noticed that particularly online because I can see all of you at any one time. I'm not going to remember your great pitch. I'm going to remember the fact that you didn't really care about what anyone else said, other than that moment when you had a chance to speak. So, because if you think about that, you could get the world's greatest script writer to write your 60-second intro. You could get a video filmed by Spielberg and put it on your social media, but no one cares. It doesn't matter. It's how you make people feel, and that really comes down to showing interest in them.
Let me ask you a selfish question, and then I want to talk about how you met Kelly, because that's a fascinating story. When I'm at networking events, and like, let's say I was at the BNI event like a couple weeks ago, everyone's talking to each other because most of them already knew each other. There weren't that many guests, right? Everyone's already with another person, or they're in a small group, and I'm there, right? And my friend Todd, who invited me, he brought me around to meet specific people, which was fun. And when I feel that when I'm in the conversation, it's a great conversation because I also like meeting people. But I never want to seem like a burden. I never want to seem like I'm butting into a conversation. So when you are alone, either in the Zoom room or you're in person, maybe more Zoom, because I mean, only is for everybody, even though there's a chapter in New York and a chapter in the UK. But like either way, Zoom or in person, how do you personally join a conversation that's already happening, or start talking with somebody even though no one is available to talk to? Do you see what I'm saying here? Like from a shy perspective, like how do we begin the conversation?
Do you know what? And I still struggle with that, particularly in the room. And I think a lot of that comes down to the event itself. That is kind of the responsibility of the people hosting that event, to get you as the visitor involved. You know, we always say it only that to our hosts, your job is to signpost this meeting and make the visitors welcome, because the members already know what's going on and they're already comfortable. So look after the visitors. So I would say, if the host isn't particularly looking out for you and try and get you into conversations, it is hard. I'm not going to pretend there's some magic formula. I think you've just got to approach people, smile. Just remember that anyone that's going to a networking event, in my mind, is giving you license to talk to them.
Okay.
Because if not, they shouldn't be there. And I would argue that they're at fault. And I've seen this in a room, Brandon. I've seen people that are in a conversation, a visitor comes up and they kind of give them short shrift. That's bad on the part of the members or the people in that group. So Yeah, I think you just have to be brave and bold. And again, I'd go in rather than saying, "Hi, this is me. This is what I do." Just walk in and say, "Oh, hi guys, I'm new here. Any tips or tell me just the simple tell me, you could say, how does this group work? What's the feel? Who should I be talking to?" Just any kind of icebreaker conversation. But again, ask them about them. They'll very happily draw you into a conversation, as opposed to being the guy that says, "Hi, this is me. Do you want to buy that thing?" Don't do what I did when
I think that's super helpful though, because there's no denying that even with me, before I joined my first networking event, it was on Zoom, my first event ever. It was one of the Ripple Effects meetings. I was so nervous because it was a new environment for me. And I know people are listening right now who even may have been in business for a while, but they're still nervous to do this thing called networking. So that was very helpful, and what you can do once you're actually there, how to get into a conversation. But also, like, understand that you don't need to have what Christine calls her whiplash statement, or your elevator pitch, or your Spielberg film reel. You don't need to have that down off the bat. Like you were a writer, right? But to other people, they're like, okay, cool. I don't necessarily see how you can help me because there isn't a specific result there, but you started to listen to what people wanted, right? We can apply that to our lives too. Like, as a coach, if you hear that people are looking for coaching on how to eliminate some negative beliefs that they have, or disempowering beliefs, or they want to get their body into a specific shape, or they want to move up into their company, they're looking for maybe a career coach or anything like that, then you can say, okay, noted. And you can actually listen for what people want. And like you did, build your product around what people actually wanted. How long would you say it took before you were able to say, okay, a lot of people want to learn about Twitter. I'm going to put something together when it comes to Twitter and actually help people to overcome some of the challenges that they're facing?
Couple of months. I'd spun up a product
Pretty
and
quickly.
I sold it to the group. I actually ended up doing an in-person workshop to talk about Twitter, which then became a LinkedIn workshop because that was starting to grow at that point. Because again, that's one of the beauties of being a small business owner. You can move quickly based on feedback, whereas I think a lot of small business owners kind of get stuck trying to make a perfect product. And I'm going to pour over the website and the social media. I'm going to put it out there. And that awful feeling that no one's responded.
Mm-hmm.
Whereas test, and it's what Apple call I don't know if it's by Apple, but when I worked briefly at an Apple store, probe and position. So find out the demand before you position the product. But yeah, once I kind of got that, it didn't end there, by the way. I started teaching people how to use social media. I then started teaching people how to blog, and I did a bit of outsourced blogging. But of course, what happened when I started doing blogging, I started to talk about the power of blogging for SEO, for brand awareness. A lot of the people that I was speaking to said, yeah, but I can't actually add a blog to my website. We're going back a few years now, probably 10 years. Oh, right. Okay. And then suddenly that alerted me to the fact that so many of the people that go networking had no visibility or control over their website. And more worryingly, a lot of people were paying for things that they didn't understand.
Yes.
They were paying for hosting and then updates, and they didn't really understand. I worked with one guy that was quite an awful situation. The web supplier that he was working with would charge him to update WordPress, even though it was set to auto renew.
Wow.
So he literally did nothing for that money. And then if the update to WordPress caused some of the plugins to stop working, he would then charge again to troubleshoot those problems.
Yeah.
And so that was actually, Kelly comes into this equation because, again, based on supply and demand, I started building websites for people because that's where the pain point was.
Yes. I love how you've evolved in business based on what other people wanted. Like, one of my biggest mistakes was creating a course as my first course ever. And I'm glad that I did it now because I learned these things the hard way. But I created a course on goal setting because I wanted to know more about goals. Goals made a big difference for me. And I assumed that other people would want that same exact thing. But it wasn't the case. I created a product that I thought other people would want, but really I was the one who wanted that. You, on the other hand, went into things and you're like, okay, what do people actually want? And how can I build a product around that? Even if all the content was the same, like even if I took my goal setting course and renamed it and framed it around the problems that they were actually experiencing, that right there would have made a drastic difference in the demand that product would have actually had with other people.
Yeah. And think about particularly B2B suppliers, and a lot of your audience will be this. How many clients do you really have? I mean, we talk about abundance of volume of contacts, and people get quite obsessed with networking. It's about making as many connections as possible. It's not, because most B2B suppliers that I encounter probably had 10 to 15 clients maximum at any one time. And most of those clients, by the way, will come from 2 or 3 serendipitous connections. We're not talking massive volume. So again, you're better off getting to know 50 people very well. They become your trusted network, and build a product for 5 people, because the chances are if it appeals to 5 and they're willing to put down hard cash, you'll be able to sell it to another 5 people. But we get really hung up on volume, don't we?
Yes. Great point. And I think that's a very new thing in this digital world, because back then we wouldn't have been thinking about thousands. We would have been thinking about the local community. We would have been thinking about our neighbor. What do they want? What do 5 people want? So it's very much this giant world that we're open to, which is a beautiful thing, but we can get caught up in that. And I think that's a great point. Obviously, networking has changed your life in many different ways. One of those ways was your marriage. So how long into networking did you meet Kelly? And did you ever go into it saying, I'm going to meet my significant other doing this? Or how did that happen in a nutshell?
The answer to that latter question is, of course, no. I had no concept of such a thing could happen. And we are still waiting for the second only marriage. So unless people are keeping it very quiet, it's not happening at the moment, but it will one day. I think it probably, before I tell that story of Kelly, I want to bring up mental health, because one of your questions earlier was about the evolution of networking.
Mm-hmm.
I started networking to look to get business, and that evolved my approach to get business. But I tell you what, I ended up staying at networking for, not just about getting business, it was mental health. Because what I realized, or I didn't know, I didn't understand well enough at the time, we're going back about 10 years now. The only time I was depressed, I had very poor mental health. I was in a very bad relationship where I was very unhappy. I didn't realize how significant this was at the time, but the only time I felt happy was when I went to my networking group.
Wow.
And that seems crazy, because if you've ever done networking just as a transactional thing, you would think, well, why did he feel happy at networking? Is he a lunatic? You know, why would that be? But there is a really valid point there, because I went to a really nice networking group. I had friends there. Obviously, I was working and meeting with people that were doing what I was doing, which is running a business. And then, you know, your friends that work in the corporate world, they don't understand your challenges any more than you understand theirs.
Mm-hmm.
So they think the freelancer, the self-employed business owner, well, it's great. You just do a couple of hours work, don't you? And then you go and sit in the garden. That's the perception from that side of the fence.
Yes.
You need to be around people that know the toil and the struggles, and the fact that you don't get holiday pay, or, I mean, I know that's perhaps slightly different in the States, but you get the point. I was going to networking because I was around people that made me feel, and key word coming, connected. One of the basic tenets for a happy human existence is meaningful connection. And I didn't really understand it then. I've read a book more recently by a guy called Johann Hari, which is called Lost Connections. And he set out to find, why is mental health in the Western Hemisphere in particular so poor? Why, given the advances in technology and how easy life is on paper compared to previous generations, why is poor mental health so rife? And one of the repeating, there's lots of reasons why, but one of the repeating reasons was that we lack meaningful connection. If you look at a lot of cultures that have, you know, happy longevity, long life, it's because they've got meaningful connection. So that's what networking gave me, which then led into, when we set up Only, to the 2 reasons that I said earlier. Let's get the transactional bit out of the way, because that's dehumanizing. That's just about people getting into a room and saying, hey, do you want to buy from me?
Yes.
Let's try and bring relationship front and center. And, you know, I will tell the story, Kelly's story, in a moment, but that ties into that. But to kind of bring that up to date now, mental health underpins everything we do at Only. It's actually built into our culture playbook.
Wow.
We want to improve mental health for business owners globally by providing meaningful connection. Because for me, that's far more important than you getting a business lead from it. And we actually heard some of the best feedback we had. A few people said to us, Only got me through the lockdown period.
Wow.
Because it gave me meaningful connection. That, for me, is a reason to build and grow Only, because that's far more important than business.
How do you do it different at Only in order to, like, how do you build the mental health into the picture? You said you get the transactional piece out of the way. Like, based on all the different groups, BNI, everything else that you've done, how does your networking group do it different?
Well, we've got a few events like Only Connect that is designed specifically to bring people together to discuss mental health. That's helmed by a wonderful lady called Vanda Varga. She's a mental health practitioner. So, you know, in a literal sense, we have an event for mental health, but I think it's really the culture of the events themselves. It's not having the rules and protocols that get in the way of running a business. So, you know, we are talking quite a lot about BNI. BNI is brilliant. BNI invented the concept of formalized business networking. We wouldn't be running our business if it wasn't for BNI.
Yeah.
But BNI is very rigid. It's very structured, which is partly why it works. But on the flip side of it, it does put a huge amount of pressure on its members to keep bringing referrals, to keep having one-to-ones, which if you're in the right place to do it, brilliant. It's really effective. But what if you're not? What if those people, and I think generationally, there is a new breed of, Generation Z that are coming in that really struggle with that pressure. I want to run a business. I don't want an outside party giving me additional pressure. So remove the rules and protocols that get in the way of running, of building relationships. That's one of our central tenets at Only. And then it's just getting the right people into the group. We say to people when they come on the call, and you might remember Kelly saying this, if you don't like people, you're not going to like it. That's not a joke. We actively discourage people to join who don't like people.
Yeah.
If they are purely there for the transaction, we say there's other networking groups for you, because all they'll do is tarnish the culture that we've got. So it's about bringing the right people in.
I love that. You know exactly who you want to have in the group. You know why you want to have them there in order to develop those connections. I mean, how many even Netflix shows and documentaries now are literally about just building that meaningful connection? I mean, I've watched a show. I don't know if you've seen it. It's called Love is Blind. Have you heard of that show?
No.
Actually, it's an incredible show. I'd recommend it. There's several seasons. The whole concept is they get these people together and they put them in these rooms where they get to talk to another person, but you can't actually see the other person. So you don't see them, but you're having these meaningful conversations. You're getting to know them, and they make a decision to marry each other before they even see each other. So that by the time they get to see each other, they already have built this connection, and then the show goes on to bring them into real life and see how it fares. And some stay together, some don't. But the idea is this idea of connection that we're just not getting from our Facebook newsfeed or from our LinkedIn. I mean, sometimes you can. I feel like LinkedIn's probably the closest that it gets to that. But going out there and actually having real conversations with people. I mean, I can see why people would say that Only got them through the lockdown, because we weren't out there talking to people. Like, ripple effects got me through it in a big way, because I went to a lot of events myself. I didn't know about Only. Like, I probably would have joined that too. I have another friend who has his networking group, and I joined that, and just talking to people, getting to know people, it has such a deep effect aside from just the business. And back then, all we did was talk to people. Like, when we traveled, when we're in the tribes, like I said at the very beginning, that connection is heavily missing. So if you're someone out there who wants to create more of those connections, but also wants to find more success in business, also wants to help people, then Only is the place for you, right? But only if you like people, right? Only
if you like people. I think it's really important to make this point as well. Meaningful connection is nothing to do with meeting in person. It can be, But think about this logically. You can be lonely in the middle of Times Square, surrounded by lots of people. You can be lonely going to a networking event if no one bothers to talk to you.
Yeah.
It isn't about the circumstance. And this is why we're now comfortable being a fully online network. As long as you put the time and effort into building depth into those relationships, you can absolutely do it online. We've seen this at our meetings, but also social media. If you just spend your time endlessly scrolling and don't interact, that's really soul destroying and depressing. I tell you, the bit that most people enjoy when they allow themselves to do it on social media is when they have a conversation with people. But how many times, and I bet some of your audience will get this, we hear this all the time. People say, yeah, but I've posted. I don't have time to reply to all the comments.
No, what's the point?
That's the whole point of it, because you're trying to have conversations with people. But I do get that. It's because we're trying to run it as a kind of part of our marketing, and we forget that the only bit that actually matters, look, I've got someone's attention, talk back to them.
Absolutely. I love that. What was that? And by the way, I'm not going to let you get away without talking about you and Kelly meeting. So let's jump into that. So I think that's something that a lot of people are going to hear, that you guys met in a networking group and you met while networking. Like, to other people, that's a very alien thing. So I would love for you, how did that happen? Like, what year did you meet? How long have you been networking at that point? And how did that connection really begin between the two of you?
Yeah, so, well, we'd been in the same networking group, but because they had category restrictions, Kelly couldn't come to my group. She went to another one. So I saw her a couple of times, and I remember, look, I never spoke to her because she used to stand up and do her introduction, and I used to look at her, and it looked like she had like a halo around her. I remember thinking, like, she just looks amazing. She looks like, this sounds ridiculous, but she looks really clean and really pure.
Yeah.
That's bizarre, isn't it? Thinking back to it. She reckons I just ignored her, but I didn't. But I deliberately didn't speak to her because I had no real reason to speak to her. Okay. And I thought, if I go and speak to her, I'm just going to embarrass myself and look quite stupid. So I didn't. And then after a few months of her coming in and out of that group, eventually I did have a reason to speak to her. We got talking, we had a one-to-one, and we actually went out for lunch straight after. We'd had that one-to-one in my office. I just said, do you want to come for lunch? Because I knew there was something going on. It was, it wasn't your typical one-to-one. We just had this energy about us, and we sat and had lunch, and we sat there for about 5 hours, and we told each other everything.
Wow.
In a really, because we both had previous relationships, we both had kids, so we'd kind of gone through that. Look, something's happening here, and I just want to tell you everything. And we knew pretty much on that day.
And then you looked at her and you said, now let me tell you about my product.
I can't, yeah, just don't bother at that point.
Did you bring up the halo to her, or did that wait until after the relationship began?
I told her that after a while, and she still doesn't believe it. She was like, no, you just didn't want to talk to me. But I absolutely did. So it was a very quick, once we had that initial meeting, we fell in love immediately. And then it became a case of, right, how do we clear everything else out of the way in order to live and work together and get married, which is the next part of that story. Connected to New York as well. Shall I leap to that bit?
Yeah. Well, how did you be? So you said that you were literally networking on your wedding day. Like, how you chose New York to get married, which is incredible, because literally you got married like 3 hours from me, which is cool. Like, why New York, and how were you networking on your actual wedding day?
Okay, why New York? Because it's cool, and the pictures under the Brooklyn Bridge kind of speak for themselves, don't they? Kelly had been married before. I'd had a previous relationship, lots of complication. That I didn't even understand why people got married until I met Kelly, and then couldn't imagine not marrying her. So it was a very personal thing. Do we try and have a UK wedding, which costs £10,000 before you've even done anything?
Wow.
And we started to investigate. The other part of the mental health thing is I'd never traveled anywhere. I had a real problem with flying, with traveling in general. And Kelly worked in travel. She'd spent a lot of time in the States, and she said, we're going to have to fix that, because I love to travel. So New York, growing up, you know a little bit about me, Brandon. I love American culture, particularly American sport. I'm weird. I know loads about US sports. Just grew up loving the culture. New York was just this, well, I'm never going to go there. It's just a pipe dream. I'm never going to go. Well, Kelly not only got me to New York, once we got to New York, we then talked about, wouldn't it be cool to get married in New York? So we found a rabbi, Stephen Blaine, who is a wedding officiant who will marry you wherever you want to get married in New York. We're not Jewish, by the way. He's just nice.
Yeah.
We found him online.
Sure.
And he said, where do you want to get married? We said, under the Brooklyn Bridge. He said, that's a little bit far for me. And I can tell this story in the States because most of you will know the geography.
Yeah.
He said, it's a bit far for me, but I'll meet you there. Okay. So we're riding over the Brooklyn Bridge in the hotel car in our wedding gear. And we looked at each other and we said, if this guy that we've only ever spoke to online doesn't turn up, we're two people dressed like this that are not getting married today. What a disaster that would be. Anyway, Stephen did turn up. He rode his bike. It was 100 degrees that day. 14th of July, 2014. I've probably got that wrong, haven't I? No, 6 years, 2016. I've done it again.
That's okay.
It's just been our anniversary, 2016. So
Kelly will comment. Don't worry.
She will comment. Stephen did turn up. He'd ridden his bike, so a pedal bike, whatever you call it. We call it a push bike, from the Upper West Side down to Brooklyn. That is a long way in 100 degrees. So he said to us, You'll have to give me a moment. I'm a bit warm. So he freshened himself up. And this is where it comes back to networking. He said, before I marry you, what do you guys do? And we said, well, we build websites. And he said, hold that thought. So we did the ceremony. We walked back over the Brooklyn Bridge, lots of Americans clapping, cheering. It was amazing. The punchline is, on our wedding day, that conversation led to us building 2 websites for Stephen.
Wow.
Because it turned out we built weddinginnewyork.net. We built that website, but it also turned out that he was a musician who'd recorded a blues album in Memphis, and we built that website for him too.
Whoa.
So that's one of the reasons that I believe you can network wherever you are, just by having conversations with people, because we tend to make assumptions about someone that's going to buy from us or do business with us, but don't, because you don't know that person's entire life and what else they're involved in, let alone who they might be married to.
Yes, it just opens up so many doors that you never would have even known existed just by having that conversation. Was New York everything you hoped it would be?
Absolutely, yeah. We went back. We've been back once since then, but and then we flew to Naples in Florida and had a honeymoon. And it was still a lot cheaper than a what we'd call a bog standard cheap wedding in the UK.
Wow.
And I drove a Mustang in Florida, so come on.
That's cool.
Can I? Yeah,
you can't beat that. Absolutely. I love that. And then you guys started only in 2018 and before the pandemic, and there's so much more we could talk about, but I think the one of the best questions I could ask you is, what is your mission now with Only? Like, where are you headed with Only? What's next? And what are you looking to accomplish in this next chapter of the business, but also in your own networking endeavors?
We want to build the biggest network, global online network in the world. Why not? Someone's going to do it. Online networking, we've proven we are living proof of this dynamic that you no longer need to meet people in person in order to do business with them. Because you guys, we might not ever meet. I like to think we will at some point, but we are still able to build these connections, do business with each other. So once you accept that truth that you no longer need to meet to do business with people, global networking is a truth. That is something that is absolutely happening. It's already happening and has been happening. Mm-hmm. We've just never had a forum to bring these people together that have been doing business for many years. So why can't we be the global leader in online networking, particularly as we've got principles underpinning it? So the stuff that I've said about mental health, we're going to launch a charity that we're in the process of getting an official charity number, because we've got a disabled daughter and we want to support children like her, who, unlike us as business owners, have got choice. She doesn't. So we want to help people like her and give back to the community. So there's a lot. It isn't about, well, I just want to build a global network because I can make a lot of money.
Yeah.
I won't say no to money, of course.
Yeah.
Because you can do a lot of good with money. You can employ good people. You can build that community. But there is a lot more underpinning only than just we're building a network.
Yes. Something I love about you and Kelly, and I haven't met Kelly yet, but I'm excited for that opportunity, is the way that you guys highlight your team that you work with. Like, you've got a team of great people, it seems. I love the content you post of the pictures with them and the great things you say about them. And I feel like I know them even though I've never met them. And I think that that's a great job on your guys' part for putting them in the spotlight. And that right there just tells me that you will become the largest online networking company. And I believe that while the pandemic brought a lot of tragedy and difficulties for a lot of people, I believe that it also brought a lot of beautiful things and opportunities, and online networking being one of them. Because in 2018, when you started, if it was only Zoom, then people would be like, well, why don't we meet in person? Why do we got to get on Zoom? But the pandemic normalized Zoom, and now it's only becoming bigger and bigger and bigger to get out there and meet people globally and talk to people from all over the world. I feel like I have more people in my network who aren't near me than I do that are near me. Most of my great friends now I haven't even met in person, which blows my mind. My personal business coach, who I've known for a year and a half, I've never met him, and he lives in Vancouver, and I'm here in upstate New York.
Wow.
So online networking is only going to become more of a thing for everyone listening. If you haven't already, dipped your toes in the water of online networking, start with Only. And my final question for you is, how can people learn more about Only networking, and where can they sign up to be a guest at a meeting?
Yeah, so onlynetworkingusa.com. There's a dedicated website for it. And you can take a look on there. You can book onto the New York meeting. Now, if anyone's listening now that wants to come along as my guest, just drop me a message. I'm very open but send me a message on LinkedIn. Don't just hit the connect button, because I'll come back to you and say, why do you want to connect? Because don't connect for no reason.
Yes.
Send me a message and we'll get into a conversation. And if you're the right fit, I'm very happy to invite you along.
Amazing. Cool. Everyone, links are in the description to go connect and send a personalized connection message to James and have a conversation. He'll engage with you. It's always great talking with you, James. There's also a link to sign up to be a guest at the New York Only networking meeting. And by the way, you can be in Dubai, or if it might only be US, but you can be in LA. You can be anywhere and still be a part of this networking meeting, because it's virtual. So you're not actually going anywhere. So go check it out. And James, just overall, awesome conversation. It was great connecting with you. I'm glad that we made this happen. And thank you for sharing your story, but also a ton of actionable things that we can actually do moving forward.
You're very welcome. Thank you for having me, Brandon.
It was a pleasure, sir. I hope that you see and have felt just through this conversation the power of networking, not just from a business standpoint, but also the many implications and effects that it will have on your mental health and your overall well-being. This idea of connecting with other people, getting to know them for who they are, not just for what James calls, which I love, the product on the shelf behind them, like this little shelf with flowers on it. But I'm not a seller of flowers, but you get the point, right? Like, sure, let that be known, that shelf with the product on it, but also learn about the human being, right? And connect on that human level, because that's what we seek as human beings. We've been doing that for ages, since the Stone Age. And James has given you some great strategies that you can use when networking. And you also have the opportunity to join this rapidly evolving networking community that is Only networking. Highly recommend you join one of it as a guest. See how it is. See if you like it. See if you like the vibe. It can't hurt. Go to the link in the description to sign up for the next meeting, and also connect with James so you can start a conversation with him. His content is incredible on LinkedIn. And even if you didn't join a meeting immediately, follow him, connect with him, and see all the amazing things that him, Kelly, his wife, and his awesome community at Only is up to. Thank you for watching. I hope that you took away a ton from this conversation. And more importantly, I hope that you use it somehow, even if you just take one thing and use it. Share this show if it helped you. And as always, thank you so much for tuning in. And until we talk again next time, continue to be better.